again. You may have noticed that for this video I don't look like a green Force Ghost. That's because until I can get the green screen working correctly, I figure maybe simplest is best. With that, on to today's topic, which is showing versus telling. Now, if you've done any research on writing, what constitutes good writing, you've run into this. It's one of the most widely known, widely thrown about pieces of writing advice out there. Show, don't tell. If you get caught telling, well, guess what? You have to turn in your writer's card, it seems. But because it's been thrown around so much, it's sort of lost its meaning or context a little bit. It's one of those things that everybody knows, but not everybody is sure of what the hell it actually means. So today I want to tell you 5 tips to help understanding what showing versus telling is, how to use it, and when not to use it. Number 1, what is showing and what is telling? To make things interesting, let's start with telling. Telling is a declarative statement. It doesn't give any grade or information. It doesn't tell us anything besides what constitutes the reality in the story world. And that's kind of it. There's really not a whole lot to say. In that case, what is showing? Showing is also, ironically, telling. You have to remember, when you're writing a story, everything you do is essentially telling. You are telling the reader what to feel. You are telling the reader what color the house is. You are telling the reader how big the dog was. You are constantly in an act of telling. However, when you're showing, you are engaging the reader's senses. You're engaging as many senses as are realistic for that particular scenario. For example, let's say we have a description such as, the car sped down the road. That's a simple declarative sentence, not a whole lot to go on there. However, what if we say, the yellow sports car's tires screeched and its engine growled as it hurtled down the road, leaving a wake of leaves dancing in the air behind it? Do you see the difference there? How with the one, you get the basic information, but with the other one, you can hear it. You can almost feel as it rushes past. That's what showing is. That's why it is so valued. Because when you're writing, you really only have your words to go on to convey an entire world of information to the reader so that they feel like they are in the story and experiencing it along with the characters. That brings us to point 2, which is, how do I do this? Now, I split this up between physical descriptions of objects in the world and character reactions. Each comes with its own set of criteria of how to do this. That's why I wanted to break it up a little so we can really focus on each one. Now, when it comes to physical objects, the environment, you really want to present salient details, things that are going to make the world, make the object jump out to the reader's mind. And why do you want to do that? Because you can get away with just saying what the thing is, but to actually describe it, it really brings that moment, that thing to life for the reader in a more concrete way that if you just name it, it doesn't quite do that. And you can also achieve interesting effects by getting into the minutia of an object. It's almost as if you are taking a camera and you're doing a pan over those details you want the reader to really fasten on and to really pay attention to. It also helps to set the atmosphere, set the tone, and you can create a lot of different effects by focusing on different elements of the scene. Let's just say I wanted to say that there was a huge statue standing in the middle of the mausoleum. Okay, that's fine, I guess. It's a statue and it's in a mausoleum. There's no atmosphere, there's no tension, there's no sense of what we should be feeling other than there's a statue in the mausoleum. It's static though. It doesn't do anything for the story or the scene. So let's try something else. The statue's huge marble eyes glared outwards, its brows furrowed. Light sluiced off of white stone muscles and bulging veins, held for an eternity in that moment of tension. A sling hung draped over the youthful figure's left shoulder, ready to be used, carrying the potential and the promise of a victory against all odds. Can you see that? I imagine you can, and if you think about it, the description there, if you really let your mind play over the details, is of the statue of David in Florence. Now that's so much different than just saying there was a huge statue. That doesn't tell us anything. But these details, instead of just saying statue of David, you can actually paint the picture in the reader's mind. This helps to engage the reader. This helps to bring the reader into the story. And it also has the reader do some of the work. If you spoon feed your reader everything, and you just tell them, this is what it is, this is what's happening, this is what it is, they're not having to do any of the work. And there's no fun in that. And on a more practical level, without reader engagement, there's a higher chance that the reader is just going to put down the story. Readers like to be given a task, a responsibility. They don't want to just be told everything. They actually want to work. And this goes towards not underestimating your reader. Readers are intelligent. They can reason things out. They can think for themselves. They have a vast library of experiences that they can draw from. By engaging in this, they feel like they are transposing some of their world into the world of the story. They are making it their own. And that's something that really no other medium can do. Maybe the closest would be video games because of the level of player choice involved, but even then, you're playing by the game's rules. You're playing within a construct. This, the reader is actively engaging their imagination. They're engaging their memories and recollections of sensations and images and feelings. And by using description, by showing and not telling, you help to guide them. You help to pick out which of their emotions and feelings and memories they're going to call upon. And that causes them to invest more and more deeply into the story, which is exactly what you want to do. Now, this brings me to topic number 3. How do we deal with character feelings? This is actually kind of tricky. How do you describe a feeling? How do you show a feeling? It's difficult. What is the sensation of anger? Anger just feels like anger. Anger is almost irreducible. You just know it when you feel it. But there's a way to actually convey this without having to say, he was angry, she was sad, he was happy, she was afraid. There are ways to get around this. One of them is to focus on what is a character doing as they experience this. One of the neat things about being a human being is our emotions are very much tied with our bodies. When you feel something, you're not just feeling it, your body is doing something. And it's the somatization of emotion that we can use as writers to convey what the character is feeling without just coming out and saying, he was upset. Again, that doesn't engage the reader. It doesn't do anything for them, and it doesn't make your reader do anything, which again lowers the level of engagement. Example, she was happy. Boring, okay? It's sitting there and it's not doing anything. But let's try, her heart trilled in her chest. She let her head fall back and she wiped out her forehead with her palm. A sigh of relief escaped lips that had begun to curl into a smile. She jumped to her feet, practically propelled forward, running down the hall to deliver the great news. Her footsteps padded along beside her. Huge difference. We can actually feel what it's like, that moment of elation, of joy so great that it propels you out of your chair, propels you forward. It's not something static. It's not, she was happy, or even she was overjoyed. Again, by describing her reaction, by showing her in that moment of happiness and joy, the reader is brought back to their own memories of what they felt. What was this experience like for them if they've ever felt joy in their life? And this draws the reader in. It shows something happening. It gives descriptions of motion, of sound, of bodily sensations, the heart trilling in the character's chest. All of these things help to draw the reader in. It helps them to feel what that character is feeling. This helps foster a greater connection between your reader and your character, and your reader and your story. Let's move on to topic number 4. In theory, you could describe anything to the slightest detail. You could go on forever. You could describe every strand of hair. You could describe every scar and pockmark and imperfection on a character's skin. You could describe every blade of grass. You could describe every nuance to a smell or a flavor. You could describe every hue of the skin of an apple. But that's not going to add much to your story. At a certain point, the benefit you get from description kind of levels off, and if you keep going, it actually takes a real steep downturn. This is because descriptions are absolutely vital to creating the world of the story. However, they can bog the story down if you just keep layering and piling on top. As much as readers want to experience the world of the story, they actually want something to happen in it. Back in the 19th century, this was a little different. You could get away with that. You could get away with pages of description. And you would see stuff like this in, say, Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. I mean, there were pages upon pages of description. But modern audiences don't want that. We've become less invested in books to provide truly tactile experiences. When you think about it, it makes sense. We have screens and televisions everywhere. We all have a phone. We can access the world of visual information and auditory information very easily. In fact, a lot of times it's forced on us. So we don't rely on it so much. We need enough that we can orient ourselves in the world of the story, but we don't need so much that it holds us back from experiencing the forward motion of the story. So how do you do that? How do you strike that balance between enough detail and overwhelming detail? What it is you have to figure out what you want to tell the reader. Each detail carries with it overtones that connect back to the overall theme and feeling of the story. If, for example, you want your story to be somewhat sad, instead of focusing on the green blades of grass, the cool wind that ruffles the leaves on a tree, instead focus on things like the scent of winter hung in the air, like scorched wood, the character's lungs burned with each breath as a chill prickled his skin. These help to again, engage the reader, but it's also telling us something, where the character is at, where the story is at. There is a looming threat. This is a story about things ending, of cold, of death in a way. It's not explicitly stated, but the associations with these things, they bring to mind darkness, cold, long nights and short days. All this stuff is helping to set the tone and help set the reader up for what your story is going to be. Choosing the right details helps to ground the reader in the story. This is just for setting and whatnot. If you're describing an object, you want to try to tell the minimum amount of details that will stick out, things that are abnormal. So if you were to describe an apple in such a way as to make it vivid for the audience, you may say something like a red apple. Okay, so getting a little bit more showy instead of just there was an apple. Okay, it's a red apple. Okay, but what's salient about it? What will the reader learn from it? Well, let's say it was a red apple with a raggedly torn length of stem extending from it. Now we're learning a little bit more about this apple. It's red, yes, but it was also maybe picked in a hurry, or picked without a whole lot of finesse. Maybe it was picked in anger, maybe, who knows? Maybe something happened that disrupted this person. That is the type of thing the reader wants to know, something that they couldn't picture for themselves. Because we can all picture an apple, but we can't all automatically picture a red apple with a length of stem extending from it. Your average person would picture an apple that looks very much like one that comes from the supermarket with a trim stem, generic. If you're going to bother describing something, it can't just be generic. You have to fasten upon those details that make it stand out and that make it worth describing. It's hinting at things beyond the description. With the correct details, you set up more than just the object. You set up tone, you set up theme, you can set up situations that can come back later that explain how these conditions were set up. But you don't have to describe everything. Again, you don't need to describe every pockmark, every imperfection. It's just those things that give a sense of your world and a sense of the situation. So in order to do that, think about what it is you want to achieve and think about what details are going to help you create the world that you want to show the reader. Finally, let's get to point number 5. I've talked a lot about how to use showing versus telling. However, now I want to tell you that there are going to be times when you don't actually want to show, where it actually would not benefit your story to show, to describe, to evoke imagery and sensation. Now you may be thinking, wow, this doesn't sound right. If I ever got caught doing this, probably my English professor or creative writing professor would barge through my window and beat me to death with a club. But there are those times when you really are going to want to just tell. What are those times? What is the correct time not to show, but instead just to tell it as it is? There are actually a couple. First of all, there are some character actions in some situations that just don't add much to the story. They're not adding to the theme. They're not adding to the characterization. They're not adding to the plot. Do we really want to spend 2 paragraphs or so, or even 1 paragraph describing how a character puts on his or her shoes? Unless this is going to tell us something about the character, we don't need to know. Is there anything about this that stands out that your reader could not know on their own if you had just said the character tied his or her shoes? If the answer is no, there's nothing that sets this apart from just the generic concept of tying one's shoes, gloss over character tied shoes. We're done here. Cut. That's a wrap. Another time when you can actually get away with not showing is when the action is happening very, very fast. There are a lot of times, and you no doubt have experienced them yourself, when you are not processing the world in any great depth. Things are just happening, or you're doing things and it's a rush and you're not fastening on every little detail. Same thing when you're writing. If something is happening and it's really exciting and there's this incredible forward movement, you cannot stall that to engage every sense. You have to very carefully pick what sense you're trying to engage, but it's not going to be everything. It's not going to be the long drawn out descriptions of character emotion or setting that other areas would necessitate having more description rather than less, more showing versus more telling. You don't want to bog down the momentum or the emotion by having these long drawn out periods of description in the middle of something that should be flowing very quickly to give a sense of velocity and speed and urgency. Sometimes too, you just want to achieve some kind of narrative voice depending on the type of story that you're writing. Sometimes, especially if it's a third person omniscient, you can kind of get away with that because the narrator is the one filtering the information. It isn't coming through a character. So you can kind of get away with almost a fable or fairy tale-like level of description of just saying what the thing is and letting that be sufficient. But that's only in those types of situations where that distance exists between the narrator and the world of the story. So those were the 5 tips that I want to leave you with for showing versus telling. I hope they were helpful and that they've helped you to understand a little bit better what this command really means, how it can be used to really powerful effect, and also when it's actually better to just tell. Remember to like and subscribe to this channel. That way you can keep getting updates when new content is posted. Thank you for watching and keep on writing.